only last week I had some samples come in, and they're coloured sands. So the coloured sands, these coloured sand samples came from China, and they're used in kindergartens and preschools. So they're fluorescent, the red, the yellows, the blues, the pinks, etc. And we actually identified them as tremolite asbestos. And incidentally, about a week later, we had some more sands, another 20 come in, and all 20 of those came back positive for tremolite.
I mean, that story you said there around the coloured sand, I mean, that's terrible. I mean, you're dealing with the most vulnerable parts of our society, which is our children.
Yeah.
We don't actually know the risk. We don't know how likely it is that the fibre is going to be able to be liberated from that sand and become airborne, and for it to be respirable, where it's going to do most of the damage.
Yeah, it's a big challenge, I suppose. If you look out in the industry at the moment, I mean, we've got some regulations that are being worked through with WorkSafe over here in New Zealand, and a big problem we face is around what is A class, what is B class, associated dust, and all of this in between. So you find, from a practical perspective, you've got a lot of old aged buildings, with 60, 70-year-old roofs that are still in situ, which are fibre cement. And obviously they start breaking down over years, so you get accumulative dust in the roof space, and you don't know the history, you don't know whether there was any previous, pipe lagging or any other materials up there when you're doing those levels of assessments. So trying to determine the level of risk associated with the associated dust is something that sometimes I think we could do a lot better. And I think that TEM definitely gives us a method of understanding the associated risk. What is the risk of re-entraining those fibres back into air so you breathe them in? Are we approaching it the right way when it comes to the remediation of that particular area? And as you say, the big part under conventional testing is that a positive negative doesn't really determine the associated risk. I mean, if you've got a positive for one fibre, I mean, ultimately, what is the associated risk of that? And we're seeing some clients spending millions of dollars on remediations for a fibre, which is a real problem. And I think that your input with the TEM stuff is needed and needs to be heard by everybody, because that's the golden goose, let me say, when it comes to understanding those associated risks.
Yeah, and listen, there was a recent example in New Zealand where a consultant went out to a site, took some swab samples in a lift shaft, at the bottom of the lift shaft. Because there was talk about the brake pads grinding away and releasing fibres, and various, let's say, key stakeholders got hold of that information, and they were trying to assess a risk without any of that particular data, and they took a series of swab samples in there and found that yes, there was asbestos fibres, but they were considered background levels. And we know that there is a background level. It was less than 1,000 structures per centimetre squared, and they referred to this document by Millett and Hayes to have an informed decision. Now, I don't know the direct outcome of that. Now, the client then has an option and choice. Rather than blindly going in there, spending hundreds of thousands, if not more than that, in cleaning up these particular lift shafts and inconveniencing the occupants of the building, he can say, well, I've got a document here, I've got a risk assessment, I've done some air monitoring, etc. We're okay with that, and we're quite happy to actually defend our position on that. And that's exactly what you're saying, Rob. It's about having that information to make a decision, an informed decision based on the scientific data. And that's what we do in our particular field. It's about that scientific data and collecting that data to make an informed decision. And I think, in society these days, we don't want to think, and we just want to quickly just grab a sample, send it off and say, do X, Y, and Z, without really testing a whole process and the decision-making process.
So when you get the sample sent through, if it's not actually done on the template, so it'll just be a positive or negative result rather than a quantitative, because they've not actually measured out the area.
Obviously we need the area. The other thing is that, like I said before, if there's a large accumulation of dust, do not use wipe samples, scrape it into the bag, because you see, what happens with us is that if there's too much dust on there, we have to dilute the sample, right? Yeah. Because again, if we have too many particles, so you can imagine this wipe, and it's loaded full of, let's say, all sorts of material from a sealing space. We put it into a beaker, and that beaker is really murky, okay? And then we take an aliquot of that, we put it onto a TEM grid. Well, we're just going to get hundreds and hundreds of particles on those. Now, those particles could actually obscure any asbestos fibers on there. So we have to do a series of dilutions. So then, if we do a series of dilutions, let's say that our limit of detection is 1,000 structures per centimetre squared, but if we've got to start doing, let's say, 10, 20, let's say we've got to do 100 times dilution, right? Then all of a sudden your sensitivity goes up to 100,000. Now that's not going to help anyone in terms of their interpretation.
Yeah.
Because I give you a result saying, well, the result is less than 100,000 structures per centimetre squared. So again, I really say to people, think about how you collect your samples, know the limitations of those particular techniques, and speak to the laboratories before submitting samples.
So sort of say on those samples there, I mean, when you look at the ASTM standards and you sort of look at sampling techniques, I mean, what's your view opposing on microvacuum? So where you're taking a swab sample microvacuum, because I know people that have done opposing samples next to each other in various locations. I mean, hundreds. I mean, I've got experience of that as well. And what we found was around 15% variance in result, i.e., more concentration with the swab sample versus the microvacuum of the particular fields. But again, it is, I suppose, is it a good leveler between the two of them?
Yeah, again, there's limitations, Rob, with any of these techniques. And people say, well, if you wipe a surface, you're more likely to pick up all that particular material. Right, if you follow correct sort of techniques, as opposed to vacuuming a particular material, especially if, let's say, material is stuck to that particular surface. And they tend to try to use micro vacuums on soft furnishings. But again, my argument is that the fibers will be entwined into the fabric of that particular material. So, again, are you going to be picking up all those particular fibers? And again, we've seen it sometimes when we vacuum our own house. We have something, let's say, a feather, that's come out of your cushion that's caught in the weave of the fabric of the carpet, and you're vacuuming over it and it's not coming up. So, it's similar with a micro vacuum sample as well. So, listen, you will get some variation, but again, we shouldn't be using the data and saying, well, this is more accurate or that's more accurate. It's about just basically getting that information as a high level context of what the contamination is. So, but you're always going to get that with any, and to be honest, even with wipe samples, if I was to take a sample right next to each other, I'm going to get varying quantities of asbestos because it's not homogeneous. It's simple as that. So again, it's understanding the limitations, and I keep saying this, the limitations and the context of what you're doing and what you're actually going to do with it. Now, again, if you use the micro vacuum and you've got 1 million structures per centimetre squared and let's say you use the wipe sample and you got, let's say, 500,000, you've got a contamination issue that you need to investigate further. And that's what it comes down to. It's not an exact science to compare exact results.
Yeah. I'm going to say it's not dissimilar when you're doing an air test and you are doing it under phase contrast microscopy, and you might do a personal, and then you get a busy filter, then it's all occluded, so you can't actually see the fibres.
Yeah, correct. Now, we have had some instances, and this happens in the mining industry, where we've had dust overloads on a filter, in accordance with the membrane filter method, more than 1/8 of the graticule on average, you basically discard that. And they've sent it to us and said, can you do a TM analysis? And it really depends on the dust loading, but we have had success in actually doing that because the magnification is a lot greater. We can see into those gaps and count areas on there where there is no sort of obscuration of dust. So there has been some instances where mining organisations said, listen, we know it's a dust overload by PCM, but we want to know, is there any naturally occurring asbestos on these filters? Can you actually do some analysis? Because it's more of a presence absence. Have they got some, let's say, some tremolite on there, actinolite and phosphorite on there? We just want to know whether we've got any structures on there. So can you do that analysis? So again, because of the high magnification, there are pockets on that particular filter that we can actually get into and actually see because they're clear of dust. So, we have used, again, it's not traditionally used for that, but there are techniques when we can actually use those sort of techniques for that.
I've had a recent project where we were taking up the vinyl tiles. The vinyl tiles came back, they were positive, but the glue came back and it was negative under PLM. So they were going to grind the floor. It's negative, we can grind the floor. I said, no, we'll wait. We'll send it off a TEM.
Yep.
And then if it comes back negative, then we can grind the floor. So we don't want to put anyone at risk.
Yep.
And it came back and it was positive for Crichton tile. So it's just as well we took that extra step to get it checked by TEM.
Yeah. And listen, if you actually think about this, it's not surprising because if you've got vinyl tiles that are actually positive, okay, it means that you've got other asbestos in that particular building, right? So if you think about it, when they're actually constructing the building, right, they're probably cutting sheets and they probably didn't have the same controls as what we do now back then. So they're cutting sheets, probably shaping them, probably sanding the walls, etc., blah, blah, blah. They probably never clean the floor properly on those construction sites. Yeah. Then they tend to put the floor down last, don't they? Because they don't want trace people actually walking over it. So then they adhere some actually glue on there. So that's encasing and trapping those fibres in the construction of that. And then you actually put the vinyl tiles on top of it.
Yeah.
So, it's not surprising that we do get these amber glues every now and then in these buildings that come back positive.
Mm. Yeah.
It makes sense to me that it's been trapped there for many years, and it was probably during the construction phase. And it's similar to what you said, Rob. In terms of sealing spaces with asbestos cement roofs. I mean, I typically don't take samples in a sealing space because I know that when they were installing the roofs, they were cutting those roofs up the sheets up on the roof. They were drilling bloody holes, putting nails in. There's no doubt that if I look hard enough and I take enough samples, that there will be asbestos there. And we put the precaution in. But what you were saying is that how do we convey the risk? This is when we can take dust samples to actually convey the risk to people in terms of, doing some either wipe samples or some analysis of that dust sample to try to quantify the extent of it there. So it's more from a risk perspective and risk communication perspective than saying, yes, it's there or no, it isn't. Because most of us would, if we looked hard enough, we'd actually find the presence of that asbestos there.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at that as well, we have an example for you that they were looking up in a roof space and there was historically some cement roofing that was previously on the building, been changed many years ago and so forth. And they suggested the consultant did a swab and said, hey, there's some asbestos fibres still present within the roof space. So instead of reacting to that, what we said is actually do some TEM testing to assert what that level of risk would be. Now, in this particular situation, they did some additional testing up there and they had in the millions of fibres that coming back. Now, the first thing we went to is, did you do and take your samples correctly? Because that's a big problem that we face, is they swab massive areas and then send it off without any determinant on that basis. But in this particular situation, we did some more due diligence and we found that there was actually an old boiler up there and all the pipe work had all of the lagging removed previously. And we found that they'd removed all that lagging with essentially hammers, which is a really bad removal technique from anybody, I can say that, which spread that fibre concentration massively through. And then over years, the dust had accumulated on top of that to hold that sort of fibre down. But we did find really, really high levels so that we could deal with it appropriately instead of just going in there and using techniques that would essentially disperse it even more and put anybody doing that removal at risk as well. So there's a real balance between, for me, I was come from a risk perspective, understanding that risk. And I think that TEM sampling gives you the tools in addition to all the other sampling techniques to actually try and identify that a little bit better.
100%. And what we're finding now is that, asbestos is still used in a lot of countries around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, New Zealand and Australia, we do have some, let's say, prohibitions about what comes into this particular country, but it's still coming into this country. And TEM is really helping to actually identify that. So, for example, I mean, only last week I had some samples come in, and they're coloured sands. So these coloured sand samples came from China, and they're used in kindergartens and preschools. So they're the fluorescent, the red, the yellows, the blues, the pinks, etc. And a consultant in New South Wales or a laboratory in New South Wales contacted our lab and said, Michael, we've isolated some fibres in these sands, and we're calling it under AS4964 unknown mineral fibre, but we really want to know what they are. And they submitted them to us, and we actually identified them as tremolite asbestos. So tremolite asbestiform, not cleavage fragments, but actually asbestiform in sands. Now, without this sort of technology, they could have been called unknown mineral fibre, and people might have waved it away and said, listen, that's probably an interferent, we don't know what it is, and people would have ignored it. But this consultant and laboratory said, no, we want to investigate this a little bit further. And incidentally, about a week later, we had some more sands, another 20 come in from a educational provider. So they provide products to the educational industry, and all 20 of those came back positive for tremolite. So, this technology, electron microscopy, enabled to identify the non-commercial types, as well as, fibres that are very, very fine, is going to help us in the future as well. Because asbestos isn't a legacy issue, it's an ongoing threat to our particular country.
Yeah.
And we have to be mindful, and without this technology, we wouldn't be able to successfully identify this. And we've seen other products. For example, kids' crayons. Kids' crayons are made up of talc. And many years ago, I had a client that submitted them to us for a PLM analysis, and we didn't find anything. So, out of interest, I submitted them to the TM, and we found tremolite asbestos there as well. And I went back to the client, and this puts us in a difficult predicament. And I said, listen, we've done TM analysis, and I have a moral and ethical obligation to actually tell you that there's actually tremolite in the sample. By the way, here's the results. Here's the certificate of analysis. I'm not going to charge you. And the reaction from the client was quite hostile, quite aggressive. Mm-hmm. I didn't ask you to do that.
Yeah.
And I wish you hadn't done that.
That's surprising.
They didn't want to know, because they're obviously importing this material from overseas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they, I suspect they knew the limitations of PLM, but you see, our regulators and people that control our borders, and this is a big gap, don't know the limitations of the analytical techniques. Yeah. So they say that all you need to do is analyse, and back then it was AS4964, and AS4964 didn't incorporate electron microscopy techniques, and that's all they say. So products, there's no doubt over the years, products have come into this country, and we don't know the full extent of that are contaminated with asbestos. Now, the risk of that might be low. We don't know, but we haven't done a risk assessment associated with that. But first and foremost, we need to identify the presence before we can formulate an assessment of risk. And unless we know it's there, how can we formulate a risk assessment and communicate what that risk is to the community? Yeah. We can't do that. So this is where this technology is really useful, but it's also knowing what the limitations of our current technology is as well.
Yeah. I mean, that story you said there around the coloured sand, I mean, that's terrible. I mean, you're dealing with the most vulnerable parts of our society, which is our children,
Yeah.
and they're playing with that sand. And obviously, we look at asbestos in the latency period before, you generally would contract a mesothelioma. I mean, it just puts them right in the middle of their adulthood. They could be at that time with young families, and they get this diagnosis, which is terrible. I mean, it was only a few years ago now, we had the gauze mats in schools in New Zealand, where manufacture was changed over to China. That had come in, and there was tremolite in the gauze mats as well. Now, that was identified. It went to a lab for conventional testing, and they couldn't report on it. And it then got subsequently pushed for TEM, which identified that these were tremolite containing. So there was a big mass run around all the schools to get these gauze mats, which are, as you know, used in science. They're heated and cooled, and they break down over time. And these are kids doing experiments, up close and personal with that particular material. So the risk there is elevated because of the way you use the product and the material. So, I mean, it is a hole, as you say, when it comes to importation of goods, and it's really worrying, especially after, as you've already said about the doors. Who's checking this stuff is the question.
AMC, expertise you can trust. There is a new dawn in New Zealand. Property owners and organisations face increasing asbestos responsibilities. Asbestos management can be a complicated maze to navigate. It's easy for a client to drop the ball, but with the right guidance, you can manage your asbestos safely, confidently and compliantly. That's where Asbestos Management Consultants AMC comes in. Independent, impartial asbestos experts helping you develop and implement effective asbestos management strategies. From document reviews and management plans to policies and asbestos training, AMC provides asbestos compliance solutions you can trust. Based in Auckland, trusted nationwide. AMC is one of New Zealand's most experienced asbestos consultancies. AMC, Asbestos Management Consultants expertise you can trust. Visit our website to start your asbestos management journey today. Visit our website at www.asbestosmanagementconsultants.co.nz.
But there's also, Rob, a big gap in conveying this information out to the regulators and border force, because we've got confidentiality requirements. Yeah. I can't go knocking on the door of the regulator and saying. So I've had instances where the regulators contacted our laboratory and says, Michael, we need to know X, Y, and Z. And I said, well, you need to give me an appropriate form that compels me and forces me to release that information, because I don't want to be actually sued from my particular client. Now, I don't know what these particular clients or these particular, let's say, consultants have actually done with that particular data. For all I know, they've actually grabbed it, put it in a bottom drawer and found another supplier. But how long has that product been coming into New Zealand, coming into Australia? Are we looking at the supply chain? And we saw that with the fire doors. And this really was unbelievable, that no one could actually ascertain the full supply chain of those particular fire doors. And they couldn't even determine the matrix of some of these fire doors, which products they actually utilise. And then, there was rumour and speculation in industry, and again, no one's proven this otherwise, that similar materials were used in ceiling tiles. Because you've seen those acoustic ceiling tiles, they're very, very similar to the composition of what's in these particular fire doors. Now, There is talk and murmurs and rumours in industry, but again, people don't want to know. And I've heard through the rumour mill that there are certain agencies out there that are aware that this might be happening, and they're saying, listen, I don't want to know about this. I don't want to test for this. I don't want to investigate this, because how do we communicate the risk? What are we going to do if the data is not favourable? And it's pretty sad that we have people in positions of influence that aren't further investigating these particular, let's say, rumours in industry.
Yeah.
But it must be happening. It must be happening across a whole range of products. I mean, we can't keep drugs out of jails, which, how can we keep asbestos out of this country with the millions of imports and the industries that are still producing asbestos? And we don't know what we don't know.
Well, just like face paints and makeup, they've been tested in Europe and they're found to have asbestos in them as well.
Yeah. But again, wouldn't you think there's an active program here in Australia by the people of influence to say, let's grab some of these products from these countries of risk where we know we've had contamination, and let's do a series of testing. Shouldn't there be that responsibility and accountability for people of influence to protect our community? But again, people don't want to know, do they? And it's unfortunate, it's associations and like yours and the OH and other sort of associations that try to drive these sort of changes, but we're restricted on what we can actually do.
Yeah, I mean, with the fire doors, it's a piece of work that I was involved with and continue to be involved in. And the first question you always ask as a conscientious person is, great, we've identified these doors. Okay, so what other doors, what other products do they use? What other products have the same insulating board within them? And have we tested all of those? And they're the first questions you ask, and you get a blank face, and they're working through this process. I appreciate that. But as you say, when it comes to the building industry, you have a supplier, sign a subby, find a subby, and then they've stored it for a little while, then they've put it on the site. So tracking the material becomes quite cumbersome. But I think, as you said, with the as a border, essentially, you go, well, if we had a lab or a testing facility for new products that are coming in and then do spot checks on various products coming from various parts of the world, that would definitely go a long way towards finding this before it becomes a 5 or 6 year importation problem that's tens of thousands of units are spread out throughout the populace. I think that it would be a reasonable step to do that. But again, when you look at that and you go, do PCBUs and these importers and the people in charge, do they know about TEM? Is it available to them? And do they even know the function of it? And that's a big question, really, isn't it?
And they don't, and that's the issue. But it's up to us through these sort of forums, through our various associations, to start communicating. And it's up to the regulators and people that can, protect our borders to become aware of this sort of technology as well. And we saw this with the fire doors. Listen, and it happened to me where, I had samples. I looked under a stereo microscope. I looked under a PLM microscope. Couldn't find anything. Sent the same sample down to TEM, and we found asbestos in there. We found bundles of asbestos. Okay, now that helped us inform the decision that the contamination was widespread, right? For this particular product. Now, again, we suspected this type of product to contain asbestos because it had been confirmed that this type of product had PLM, but it just gave some more evidence that it wasn't an isolated case. So again, it's knowing how to use that particular data. And listen, there was some talk early on that, yes, asbestos was present, but it was below the limit of reporting. Therefore, it's no asbestos. We actually submitted some samples through to the University of Queensland University of Technology to do some sort of quantitative analysis in there, and they confirmed that it was greater than 0.01%. But because the material was typically non-homogeneous in these materials, and some of these products I found lots of asbestos that you could see under a stereo microscope. Others I couldn't find any, and we found it by TM. But it just did help us that the extent of asbestos was widespread, and it wasn't limited to one particular batch or this particular product. And again, it's knowing how to use that particular information to determine what strategy are we going to implement to actually communicate the risk and actually try to rectify this particular issue. And with the fire doors, my view is quite simple. If they're sealed, they're installed, we just manage them like any other fire door on site. Mm-hmm. What I don't want to see is people pulling these out for the sake of pulling them out.
Yeah. I mean, from a risk
other
perspective,
people might have, that's right.
Yeah, from a risk perspective, I agree with you 100%. The challenges always come in when you overlay building regulations to that, and then you've got obviously clients saying, hey, I didn't want to buy a asbestos fire door, I want that removed and changed. And under the different contract law, they're required to remove it straight away to get a CCC for a building. I mean, it becomes really, really convoluted. And I think really the only way to address that is to go back to source. If you fix it before it becomes a problem, i.e. coming in and imported in, you then reduce the downstream cost effects of it, and not bury your head in the sand and think that it's not a problem if I didn't know it was a problem,
But if we take this to the next level, I mean, should we be having discussions with the people that protect our borders and say, listen, these are the sort of products from our experience, because we're experts in this industry, that may contain asbestos. This is the limitations of the various analytical techniques. Should we have a campaign, a proactive campaign for products from countries X, Y, and Z? And I'm not saying hundreds, but, it might be one or two samples every now and then to actually verify whether they're asbestos-free or not. And this is exactly what you guys are saying. Let's basically stop it before it comes in the country. But should that be conversations that we're having with the relevant people? Because I suspect the people that protect our borders aren't aware. They don't have the same knowledge as what we have. They probably don't have the oversight. They don't have the transparency of what we're actually seeing in our industry. But there's a number of cases that we can actually cite that actually proves that it could be cost benefit to the community to implement such a program.
Do a representative TEM sampling on the products coming in from those high-risk countries.
And they might be crayons, they might be makeups, they might be talc powders. I mean, I don't know. I don't have an infinite list. But we can look at we can look at some of those products from what we've seen in other countries, etc., to actually see where asbestos was typically used. What sort of ingredients do they use? So if they use talc, we know that there's a probability that there might be asbestos contamination. And we saw this with the I think and every few years it keeps raising its head. We saw it with the vermiculite issue. And you probably saw that in New Zealand probably about 5 years ago. We had contaminated vermiculite that was actually coming into this particular country. So there must be a plethora of products that we can highlight, give to Border Force and say, let's have a proactive campaign of actually testing these particular products. And it's going to save, let's say, industry, the community, millions and millions of dollars per year. If we can just stop one of these products coming in, it's paid for itself.
I definitely agree. I mean, when you talk about TEM testing and being expensive, because that's a big, the elephant in the room. A lot of people say, it's quite expensive to test and we're going to choose a cheaper option. I would put it to them that, for example, with a fire door as a reference point, you get a fire door like that in a big $20-30 million building development, and you get to the end and you can't complete it because the fire door makes up part of the fire system, so you can't sanction or sign off the building for public use. So you sit there waiting, and obviously with this, you've got hundreds of thousands of fire doors to replace, so the supply of them is constricted at that time. So if you wait 6, 8, 12, up to 6 months, even in some situations, to get replacement doors, you've got a completed project without any completed doors. Now, there may only be tens of thousands of dollars worth of doors, but there'll be millions of dollars of charges to the client without they know that, they wanted the building open for this time, they've got a public event booked. There's all of these downstream effects. And I would have it that they cost tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, for a few $100 test. And I just 100%. Look at that and I say, it's just strange that people don't think like that. Maybe they don't know, and maybe we do need to have more of these conversations, Michael, because I don't think they're seeing those downstream effects of doing it right, do it first time, you save money for everybody.
No, it goes back to education, doesn't it? And people being aware of TEM. So can you take us through a little history of COHLABS, TEM in Brisbane?
Yeah, so many years ago, I was in a corporate position, been there for a number of years, and in life you actually find that the more senior you become, the less skilled work you're trained to actually do. So you tend to look at spreadsheets, profit and loss statements, safety statistics, compliance audits, etc. And we actually don't get back to what we're trained to do, which is science and hygiene. And I have this motto in life that the life you want to live is on the other side of the work you're avoiding. For me, the life I wanted to live was have freedom, choose where I spend my time, do what I want to do. And the only way I could do that was basically set up COHLABS.
Yeah.
So in 2014, we actually set up COHLABS. And we started off, and COHLABS stands for Consulting Occupational Hygiene Laboratory Services, but it's also a play on words. It's about collaborate as well.
Yeah.
Because I learned in life that collaboration is the key to success. You collaborate with your industry partners, people that do other labs, your clients. That's how we succeed. And I worked this out at university very, very early, that if I try to do all the work myself, I wouldn't get through in 3 or 4 years with a chemistry degree. But if I collaborate with people and you network, and this is what, I mean, we don't have the answers for everything, but it's about knowing where to go. You know, we started off as a laboratory and a typical sort of hygiene practice. And then in 2020, just before COVID hit, I had an opportunity to invest into a TEM. And it was a bit of a sliding door moment. There was a couple of players that were looking to come into the Australian market, and I'd been president of the Asbestos Industry Association for about 20 years, and they want to know the lay of the land and who's here and what are people doing. And I actually said to them, there's a real gap in industry around technology and electron microscopy. And I heard in Europe and US that it was quite big. So we sat down and said, okay, let's bring this technology to Australia. Let's be the first, and let's see where it goes. And we bought a TM from an organisation. They were going to actually assist us in actually running the actual machine. They were actually going to provide the technical resources. And after we handed over large sums of money and the equipment was delivered, they went into administration. I was left with this very, very expensive piece of equipment. And I had this idea that, okay, that's okay. I've got a chemistry degree. I'm an occupational hygienist, so I'll work out how to actually use this myself. And I came to the realization that it's not a week, 2 week, 3 week, 4 week, month course that I need to do to become an expert in this particular field. So then we looked at industry partners, and we partnered with a group in France called ITGA, who were in Australia at the time. They had one particular individual that was just looking and doing a reconnaissance sort of mission to see, what the market in Australia was like. And I actually approached him at the AH conference and said, listen, can we have a bit of a chat? I've got this dilemma. I've got this, I want to bring this technology. I want to be the first, but I don't have the time, and I don't think I have the expertise and experience to actually set this up. A year of going backwards and forwards in terms of contracts and working everything out and investment sort of splits. We basically got COHLABS up and running. And, I look in hindsight now, and I think it was the best thing we've actually done, because we've got this expertise back in Europe, with thousands of employees and technical expertise. And just to put this into perspective, we have over 25 individual standard operating procedures for TM. Right? So for PLM, I've got one. For phase contrast, I've got 2. But I've got over 25 of these. And I look back now and I actually laugh, sort of thinking about it, that imagine if I tried to do this by myself. I just wouldn't have been where I needed to be, And then, there's been a lot of help along the way. People like Frank Ehrenfeld, who's a great supporter of your particular industry, and he did our NATA assessment, and that was really bizarre because NATA operates completely different. But Frank was over in the US. We had COVID restrictions. We'd invested a lot of money. We wanted to get this up and running, and we had to come in at 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and it was set up like a TV studio. Like, we had cameras on our technicians here. We had cameras in our fume cupboards. We had cameras into our computer models. It was like a network production, at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had NATA there, and I had people from NATA head office, dialing in at 3 o'clock to see how this assessment was done, and it was done over a 6 to 8 week period.
Wow!
But Frank was our assessor, and Frank was absolutely fantastic because he helped us along the way. And anyone that knows Frank he's very generous in his time, and he gave up his time, and he educated, and he said, this is how we do it, and by the way, this is what I do, etc., etc. And it was like even though we had the expertise over in Europe, and we had an expert that had 5 or 6 years, etc., we still learned from that. We learned from that process, and I take that approach when I do NATA assessments now. It's not about passing, failing the laboratory. It's about lifting the standard, and it's great to have people like Frank out there that has this sort of, he has this outlook in life to actually mentor, encourage, improve, and lift standards. And he operates in the same space here. And listen, his company was operating, remotely in the United States and offering services in New Zealand. But he welcomed with open arms to, hey, great, it's fantastic. Another player in this particular market, and I can't thank him enough for how he supported us along the way as well. And it's great to see people in industry actually do that. But that's listen, and there was obviously some ups and downs as we went along, and it's a journey that at the time is tough, but you look back and you say, you've grown as an individual out of that experience. And again, it's about collaboration, and what you guys are doing, collaborating and obviously sending the message out there. That's what it's about. You're not getting paid for this, but it's absolutely fantastic. And I think we all need to do that. We need to work together. None of us are competitors. We're all got a common goal out here. Okay. Yeah. And if everyone just has that same philosophy, we will basically go further in our particular profession.
I agree. Absolutely. Yeah. So have you seen a big increase in TM sampling then, more demand from 2 years ago to now?
100%. So, when we first started, we're lucky to get one sample a week, and, at the time, there was discussions bleeding edge versus leading edge, and again, Rob, you sort of mentioned about the cost, and the cost is several $100s. Well, the cost from my perspective is cheap compared to the outlay that we had. I mean, a brand new machine, we're talking, in the millions of dollars compared to a $15,000, $20,000, let's say PLM microscope. So the cost is comparative, and I would say cheap compared to the outlay. And it's interesting. We've had phone calls from labs and saying, I've got 100 paint samples. Can you do them any cheaper? And I said, no, I can't. I said, I can't, because there is a process. There's no way of actually fast tracking it. It's same with PLM analysis. Okay, people say, can I get a discount for bulk samples? No, you can't, because the process is the same. I've got to take the sample out. I've got to spend 15, 20 minutes going through it under a stereo microscope. I've got to grab fibers out. I've got to put it in a refractive inexor. We don't have, a machine, let's say like an ICP to analyze, let's say, metal samples where you load it up into an auto sampler, you press go, and overnight you get all the results. It's very labor intensive what we actually do. So, but to answer your question, yes, we have seen an increase, and a dramatic increase since from where we first started. And it's great, because people are now seeing the value. And see, price is what you pay, value is what you actually get. So people aren't seeing, and we get it all. We get it all the time. A few $100s for a sample. It's worth it, because it's exactly what you were saying, Rob, before. The downtime on a construction project. is costing tens, if not hundreds, if not millions of dollars. The unnecessary cleanup of buildings is costing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of buildings. So people say for a few $100s, I can actually limit my financial exposure. We're seeing it now in demolition surveys now, where consultants say, listen, I want to know this sort of stuff. I want to actually know what the results are so we can limit any variations.
The Asbestos Still Kills podcast could not be possible without another one of our sponsors, the Environmental Innovation Centre, EIC, are frontrunners in uniting innovation, research and environmental solutions. EIC is an impartial, independent and science-based consultancy who will provide robust, reliable and independent evidence of your commitment to sustainability, practical, science-based solutions for ongoing environmental problems to support your longer-term journey. A single consistent voice to communicate complex scientific and technical issues to staff and customers. If you have publicly stated that you have sustainability goals, we are the team to help you achieve and validate them. For more information, go to www.environmental-innovation.nz. EIC, leading the change for a sustainable tomorrow.
It's all about the value proposition. And that's what we've always been about, is selling the value proposition. And listen, if you don't think it's valuable, that's entirely up to you. That's your opinion. All right? If you see value proposition, you see what this technology can offer, then it's there for you to actually utilize.
Yeah. I mean, as you say there, the value, from some of the work that I do, for us as clients as well, it is invaluable. We've saved the taxpayer of New Zealand, just through what I'm doing with schools, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars by doing it this way. But there's another part I really want to sort of reflect on, and one is, as a licensed assessor myself, we're often asked to provide clearance assessments post cleaning or anything, and also comment on approaches to that removal remediation project. And honestly, there are gaps in our current regulations that leave you a bit exposed. So for me, I'm a very scientifically based person. I say, okay, if I tell you something, I want to be able to prove it scientifically. If I say, well, I think it's safe, they say it's the assessor's responsibility to say it's free from all asbestos as far as reasonably practicable. And you sit there and you go, well, that could be defined many, many different ways by many different people. And as a previous life as a building surveyor, understanding the legalese of these projects, I'm always nervous to that point to say, hey, I want to measure twice and cut once in this particular approach. I want to make sure it's done right. So TEM for me was always a lifeline, and always has been, for me to reach out and say, actually, I want to know more about this. Yeah. Is it safe? Isn't it safe? Quantitative, qualitative, that type of things I really want to understand before I put my name down on a piece of paper and sign to a client to give them the best advice I can.
Yeah. And again, Rob, it's like you're saying, it's having that technology available to make an informed decision. And that's what it's about. This technology is not there to, like I say, do millions and millions of samples. It's not set up. It's too costly, as you said. It's labor intensive, but it's a tool that you can use to make an informed decision, and that's what it should be used for. And this is what I try to convey to people. I mean, if you have a Bentley in your garage, you're not going to take it out every day to go to the shop. So you might take your Ford, your Holden down there to the shop, but every now and then you might need a Bentley because you're picking up King Charles to take him for lunch. So again, it's about course. It's horses for courses. That's what it's all about. Yeah.
So there was you. COHLABS TEM up in Brisbane. Yeah. Now there's going to be another laboratory down in Melbourne, so it's becoming more popular. So what's the future of TEM in Australia? Are all the labs going to pop up all over, do you think? Become more popular?
Well, as I said before, it's a high entry price. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's one of those where people are going to have to make a long-term, let's say, commitment to their organisation. And I hope there are more labs, because I can see a long-term value proposition in this to industry. So it's great. And I think over time, people will actually see the value proposition.
Yeah.
I don't think we will see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these.
Yeah.
I can't see people investing the sort of money that what we have to get this up and running. And this has always been one of the issues for PLM and PCM labs. Is it's so simple, the technology, and to start up, and buy a microscope and have a small clean space. The starting price is insignificant. So that's why we've got hundreds and hundreds of labs. And again, it's not something, again, to understand how to actually do the analysis, as I stated before. It's not something you can do a week course or a 2-week course to understand the intricacies of this sort of analysis. It's very, very complicated, and sample preparation, etc. And you really need to know what you're doing. So, I mean, we certainly need more labs, and I welcome more labs. I mean, one of the issues that we've always had is around people offering proficiency programs for us. We've had to go into international for that. And some organisations will not allow us onto their proficiency program because we're in Australia. So, we've had pushback from people in the States.
Yeah.
So we have to set up our own internal sort of external proficiencies with international partners. So we're fortunate enough that we've got people like ITGA that support us, that can actually run that sort of proficiency program for us. So, the more labs we have, the more support we have, the more expertise we have, the more people see the value proposition, because, I'm a lone voice at this moment in time trying to promote this technology. And people will be critical and say, well, Michael, you've got a vested interest in this. Yes, I have. But let me tell you, well, we are barely basically covering our particular costs on this particular on this particular technology. I mean, to get a service of this costs several thousands of dollars once a year. I mean, we had our circuit boards replaced recently, $40,000.
Yeah.
We're replacing our EDS, which gives us the chemistry of that, $100,000, because over a 10-year period, got that outlay of
that maintenance
maintenance costs, which we are constantly upkeeping.
Yeah.
Or going through. So to answer your question, yes, I think there will be more labs, and I think some of the bigger players, the bigger laboratories will look at this sort of technology. It's whether they provide a service that is boutique. And for us, it's not about sample throughput. I mean, some samples we lose money on. I mean, we have to, because we have to do reanalysis and analysis, re-prepare, because we're not getting results that, or we're getting conflicting results.
Yeah.
So we have to do that. So because we can't say to a client, we're going to charge you hourly rates. They want certainty over that price. And it's similar to PLM analysis. You have some samples that are very easy. You might get a fibre cement sheet sample that cross like bang, done in 10-15 minutes. But then all of a sudden you get a sample with a difficult matrix, and you've got to ash it, you've got to reduce it, etc. But I haven't seen any lab that says a cement sheet sample $50, bitumastic samples $80, and vinyl tiles $70. Calcium silicate samples of fire damage. No one does that. So it swings and roundabouts, and at the end of it, you hope that some take it evens itself out. So So I think there will be more labs. I hope there's more labs, because we certainly can't do all the work. And I certainly don't want to be, running an operation that's 24/7. I mean, I started this business, as I said, because if you run a business 24/7, myself as a director and other directors will have to be on call 24/7. And I don't want that. And listen, the most important thing that we have in life as we get older is the currency of time, not money.
Yes.
It is time, and time becomes the most important currency we have. You can always make more money. If you lose money, you can make money. But if you lose time, you can't make up time. So, for me, I want to see other labs, because I don't want to be the only commercial lab actually offering this particular service. So the others will invest in this technology, and they see the value proposition. And listen, having someone like, as I said, Brian, investing in this, and knowing what he knows and what he's seen around the world, is to me a big tick of approval that this technology is the way to go.
So how do we educate people going forward? The PCBUs that aren't aware of it.
It's about doing these. It's about doing these particular podcasts. It's what we had at FAMANZ, where there was a presentation there. It was, it will grow. Every certificate that we send out is promoting itself. Because people see that and they go, hey, crikey, gee, I never knew that. Great, fantastic. And every service that we offer to a consultant, I say that we don't need to do business development marketing. Our product sells itself through its value proposition, right? And if it doesn't sell itself, right, then we're not offering a value proposition to the industry. I don't need to have to sell our services, but it's just making aware that these technologies, and the fact that, to be really honest, that 5370 was actually implemented where it has this technology means that industry is aware of it, because at the back of it, it's got electron microscopy services. And the fact that we've actually got in there now that it's either asbestos yes or asbestos no, or inconclusive, you need another technique, any PLM laboratory will now say, okay, I've got to give that option to my particular clients. So it will self-promote itself over time. And people will see the value of it as you good folk are seeing the value of it as well.
I think it's a massive step forward. Absolutely.
I was going to say there, we all understand that the key part to managing asbestos in properties and in our countries is to understand where it is. And I think TEM gives a valuable look into, where it actually is and is more accurate to where it is. I mean, I just look from my perspective, and something that always haunts me is that we know that just in New Zealand alone, 4 people a week are dying of a mesothelioma. If you stress that, and is that acceptable? It's just not acceptable. And these type of things at TEM are required so that we know where it is and we can manage it appropriately. Because if we don't, this is just going to carry on. As material breaks down over time, it becomes more risky. It's not going away. And everyone thinks it's a problem of the past. And, I just want to make sure that everybody's aware it's not a problem of the past. It's a problem we're dealing with every day, and we're all passionate about doing. And I think TEM is just one of those methods of doing that, really, in my view. And I'm pretty passionate about making sure that we've got all the tools available to put this thing and make sure that we improve what we're currently dealing with,
Absolutely.
No, agree 100%. And as you said, Rob, it's not a legacy issue, it's a future issue. And we still have products coming to this country. And it's interesting, if you look at the statistics, what we're seeing is an increase in non-occupational exposures. But do we really understand where those exposures are coming from? Are they legacy issues, or is it issues like the SANS? Is it the issues like young kids at an early age playing with these coloured sands in kindergartens and then developing their disease from that exposure, but we didn't know about it? Is it from the makeup that people are putting on their face, but we didn't know about it? Is it about the body talc that we used to cover ourselves with, after we come out of shower? Do we truly know where the non-occupational exposures are? Now, we assume that it's from legacy products in buildings, etc. But can we categorically and unequivocally say that that's the case? We don't. But as you said, it's not until we know where the material is that we can start making informed decisions about how we're going to manage those particular risks. And now, I hate to say, but we don't know where it's actually coming from.
What's the most unusual product you tested, which you didn't expect to find asbestos in?
Oh, listen, we found it in all sorts of different products, but the most recent one is the sands.
It's the sand.
It looked like beach sand to me. It was very, very granular. It was colourful, and I thought to myself, I've heard of crayons before. I've heard of makeup before on the internet. I've heard of talc before. I've heard of in bitumastics and various vinyls and fibre boards from overseas. I've never heard of it in sands. You know, granular, you know, it was seriously, it is like beach sand, but coloured.
Yeah. Wow. So one last question. Can you provide us a quote that inspires you, please?
And I probably mentioned this before, Jason,
Yeah.
Rob. The life you want is on the other side of the work you're avoiding. And you think about it, life is all encompassing. It could be, you know, your health. It could be your, let's say, relationships. It could be work. But the life you want is on the other side of the work you're avoiding. And why do people actually avoid doing that work? Might be because of fear. It might be because of lack of discipline.
Yeah. Comfort zones.
Comfort zones. Or it might be bloody hard, mate.
Yeah.
But we all get into, you know, we look at things and we say, gee, it'd be good if we could do this or we could do that. And that's what I want. You can do it. But you've got to do the work. And that, you know, inspires me. And even with your podcast now, you probably think to yourself, probably thought about it, you know, and said, gee, I'd love to be, you know, on these podcasts here, but gee, it's a lot of work. But you know, don't avoid doing that particular work to get the life you want. So
That's brilliant.
That means a lot to me. Yeah, and I always remind myself, if I want something, and we set up COHLABS because I wanted freedom. I wanted to choose the work I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, what clients I say no to, what jobs I say no to, what jobs I say yes to, as opposed to someone saying to me, you've got to go here, you've got to do that. But for years, I was avoiding doing the work to actually set this up.
Well, I hope from this podcast people take a lot away from this podcast. If a sample does come back under PLM, polarized light microscopy, and it comes back negative, then there are options. You can send it away for TEM just for the confirmation that there's definitely no asbestos there.
Rob, Jason, really thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to working with you both again in the future.